Hello, friends. Um, this service is beautiful. Thank you all for being so inviting. I am a short Caucasian female. I go by she, her pronouns. I have long red hair and I'm wearing a blue dress today with yellow flowers. It was kind of fun to get dressed up today because a lot of the work I do, I have to wear pants because I'm down on the floor with kiddos or hanging out with people. So my name's Holly. I'm nervous. I'm just going to be upfront with that. I also have ADHD, so standing still is not my strong suit. So I'm going to try not to bump your sound system. So, I like to, whenever I share pieces of my passion and my work, I always like to start with just a little bit more about me because I think that that's important for you to just see a little glimpse of who I am. So I was raised in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains where I learned to hug trees. I learned to fall in love with the world. I was raised in a home with a lot of privilege, and I recognize that. I had a roof over my head, I had food, I had safety. I was also raised in a home, though, where there was a lot of emotional distance. And that has been something that still today in my early 30s, I struggle with. And I was despite the safety, the physical safety that I grew up with, the stability that I grew up with, I was a child victim of sexual abuse from someone outside of my home. And that abuse shaped me and still does. I also grew up in a home where I was raised as an evangelical Christian, and religion was a huge part of our world. And that experience did one of two things for me. It showed me how easily people trust people in power and call it God. I learned a lot about the conflicting space between the goodness of someone that I was told to trust and love and the horror that happened in the world and happened in my own life personally. I also learned, though, that the beauty in religion is that there is something deeper, and in spiritual spaces, there is something deeper that can connect us and unify us despite our differences. At 18, I ran away. I came here to the Midwest. I left the real mountains for pretend mountains, but that was about 12 years ago now, and I can tell you now that I love the Midwest. I think it's beautiful. While I was here, I entered a very hard, challenging season of my life where my own choices led to a lot of spaces of homelessness, of addiction, of places of just longing to find love and belonging and wanting to keep people at a very long arm's length distance. The end of that season in a horrific, emotional space of some mental health struggles, and an almost successful suicide attempt. I met people who took me in, who saw me as family, who loved me and became my support system. And in that season, I became a believer in the power of relationships. I believe that while so much hurt and horror happens at the hands of people, so does healing. In that season, I also met my husband. My husband and I could not be more different from each other. He was raised in a home where religion was also a huge priority, but he was still living at home with his mom at 26 years old and had never kissed anybody. And we could not be more different, but the way that he loved me and still loves me to this day is the kind of love that didn't just love me then, but saw the potential in me. And we have continued to grow and thrive and become together. We have two amazing kiddos, Ellie and Hudson, and they're all home today. But before we're blessed with those two adorable, wild, crazy kiddos that also woke up very early this morning, like Neri. My husband and I decided that we wanted to try to start a family. And under trees and flowers in backyards across the city, I buried a couple of our babies that didn't make it. So my husband and I began to process, how do we start a family? What does that family look like? And we fell in love with the idea of foster care. We didn't see it as a chance to build a family, but we saw it as a chance to share the love that we had in our home with kids that needed love. But we were also in a season of like apartment living, college. So he was finishing his master's degree. I was finishing my bachelor's degree. We had lots of debt. And it was like, well, someday we'll do this when things line up, right? I am incredibly grateful for the way our journey happened because I had no training. I had no idea what it actually took to be a parent. And we ended up with a little boy in our household based off of a kinship placement situation. We found out about him on a Thursday. By Monday, we were parents, and I had no idea what I was doing. I'm grateful for that experience because I realized very early on that I knew as little about the foster care system as his mom did, who was the one who was caught in the system of it. We knew we would love him. I didn't realize how much we would love his mom. We entered into a season where I would hold him at night while he cried for her. I would take him to visits where he would spend time with her, and then I would be the one to drive him away from her while he cried and she cried. And we watched her, despite that immense amount of grief, do the unthinkable, where she turned away from all the things and she left all the people and independently, completely by herself, made choices to fight for sobriety and stability. And to this day, she's one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. For 18 months, we got to call him ours. And then one night, on a very, very quiet night in our house, we got to send him home. And that experience forever shaped me as a human, because what I saw in that season was how little faith communities, especially here in a city that is so full of faith spaces, actually support, speak to, and love on families that are working towards reunification and post-reunification. I saw how much narrative is around topics like adoption and topics like, how do we support kids that are in care? How do we fund kids that are in care instead of trying to fight hard to keep families together? I also saw this very practical need, and this is where the Family Connection program was born, for families who are in the system, who are working through impossible circumstances, to have spaces where they can just spend time together that's safe, and that's healing, and that's loving. And I'll share that story here in just a little bit. But what I want to share with you just a little bit is, and to this day, I still have a relationship with our little guy. He is taller than me now. He came to us when he was 5. He's way taller than me now. He is thriving in his home. And while there are still struggles, just like there are struggles in my life, his mom continues to be one of the people that I'm most proud of in this world. She's married now, she's healthy. And the reality is that little boy has so much peace in him because he got to go home. A little perspective about the foster care system, if you're not super aware of it, is that the history of the system was born in the era of the industrial era. So I'm in school, so I'm going to educate you. I'm finishing my master's degree here. In the industrial era, there was a time when there was a rise in cities, there was a rise in factories, and there was a rise in illness because all of a sudden everybody was congregated together in these very dirty cities. There was a lot of orphans. A lot of children lost families, their parents, to factory injuries. They lost families to illness. And when there was a gentleman who was like, we need to do something about these orphans, they came up with this idea to put kids on trains and move them to the West to live on farms where they would work. Some of these kids entered families where they were loved. Most of these kids entered families where they became servants and they worked for their room and board. Churches then and faith spaces then started to take in some of these kids and place them with other families in their communities. And then at some point, because there was still a grave amount of abuse that was happening in those homes, we saw the state decide to create what we know as the foster care system. The system was created for families in poverty. And to this day, the system is still a system for families in poverty. At that time, it was for families that were white. Today, we see a disproportional amount of Black and brown-skinned kids that are in the foster care system. The verbiage that is used by the system is that the goal is to reunify kids with their parents, that the work is supposed to see these kiddos go home, but we still see less than 50% of kids in our county go home to their moms and their dads and their parents. I have now been in this work for a little over 4 years. I have fallen in love with over 85 families in our city. I can tell you that every single one of the parents that I have held space for, that I have physically held while they've cried, while kids have been driven away to homes that are not theirs, has told me horrors about the lives that they had before. Most of the time, those horrors happened at the hands of their own caregivers, and there's never been space for healing. There's never been resources that have allowed them to access healing and support in the way that so many of us have. There are 3 consistents with families in our foster care system, and so many people assume the abuse and neglect piece of that, and there is definitely a criminal side of that. That is horrific. The majority, over 80% of our families in the foster care system, they are families in poverty. They are families who have experienced their own trauma, and there are families that don't have a support system. Many of the parents that we are so quick to be concerned about are the kids that we were worried about yesterday. Safety is something that we talk a lot about when it comes to the system, physical safety. We want to see kids that are in houses. We want to see kids that are fed. We want to see kids that are not being harmed. But one of the most heartbreaking things is that, especially in today's economy, post-COVID era, where a COVID economy has damaged so many people, we have over 800 kiddos in our system here in Greene County right now, and only 205 foster homes. What we see out of that is that kids are being split up from their siblings. And so we have a home who can take 1, a home that can take 2. And so a sibling set of 3 is being split up by strangers who don't know each other to make sure that those kids are seeing each other often. We have kids that are moving out of state, out of the city limits, that are living hours away from home, and they're trying to make it to a visit once a week, sometimes even once a month, to see their parents here in Greene County. We have group homes that are overflowing with teenagers that are considered hard to place because they're teenagers and they come with angst and attitude and their own trauma. But on the inside, they are just heartbroken kiddos. We also see a lot of kids that are being placed with family, oftentimes even out of state. And when kids are moved out of state, the risks are the likelihood of them being reunified drops down considerably. Sometimes these kids are placed with family members they've never even met. I want to share a few stories with you because I'm good at making people cry. But because the work I do is something that I'm so incredibly passionate about. And then I'll share a little bit about our program, and I'll talk to you more about that later, I guess, at the thing after service. So most of the parents I get a chance to work with, they are parents who struggle with mental health. They are individuals who have fled domestic violence situations, oftentimes fleeing to a shelter that then did not actually have space for them because our shelters are overflowing. They are individuals who are homeless. And in this season, what we see is there is about 1,100 kids in the SPS system that are registered as homeless. It's the McKinney-Vento program. The social workers there assume that that's only about half of the kids that are actually considered homeless in our city. But most of those families fly under the radar because they are terrified of the system. Something that we see in many of these families in COVID era is that the homes they were living in, maybe they were staying with friends, maybe they're staying with family, they can no longer afford to feed that many mouths. So now families are getting kicked out of homes. We see families living in tents. We see families living in cars. And the reality is there's nowhere for these kids to go, but there's nowhere for these families to go together. We're right now, and I'm going to share some stories, but I'm going to do it in respectfully. So I'm not going to share things that are going to exploit or going to share any details, but we're working with a mom right now. When I first met this mom, she was very guarded. She didn't want to talk to me about much going on in her world. She was very good at sharing the good without talking about the bad, right? But when she sat down with her kids, kids that are a wide age range, so we're talking some teenagers who are, as we all know, they come with their own stuff. There was this beautiful parent-child bond. There's so much attachment. There was so much beauty. They'd sit and they'd share meals together. They'd sit and play games together. And this whole family just did everything together in their 2-hour visit. And then these teenagers, when they left their mom, they would cry and they'd say, Mommy, I just want to come home. Mommy, I just want to be with you. So one day I took her out to coffee and I just asked her, will you please tell me your story? She shared with me a horrific story of physical abuse growing up. A story where the system came into her life as a child and took her away from her parents. And while she was in care, she went mute because she missed her caregiver. We talk so much about physical safety for kids in the foster care system, but I can tell you right now that almost every child in the system wants their parent to be their safe place. They want healing and they want health and they want stability, but they want that from their parent. They don't just want to enter a new home. They don't just want new people. Because like I said, while so much harm and damage can happen at the hands of people, healing can too. But there's an amazing amount of healing that happens when it happens from the same people that once harmed us or put us in places where sometimes there was safety risks, who then fight like hell to keep us together, to help us heal. This mom proudly told me that after she was in the system for a while, she went back home because she was just not thriving in the system. And she re-entered a horrifically abusive home. She told me how she had learned to use drugs from her mom when she was like 9 years old. But then she proudly told me that as a teen mom, she had 2 kiddos and she graduated with one in her belly and one on her hip. And she told me, I've never hit my kids. I broke that cycle. I broke the cycle of physical abuse. I've never abused my kids. But she was still caught in the cycles of poverty and the cycles of addiction and the cycles of mental health. And as I talked to her, I learned you've never healed from the trauma that you went through. So no wonder your coping mechanisms are still the same. No wonder you still struggle because there's been nobody to tell you, I love you. And she looked at me and she goes, Holly, I just want a mom. I just want a mom to love me. And I told her I'm younger than her, but I'd adopt her in a heartbeat. I have seen this mom walk away from everyone. I've seen her walk away from everything. I've seen her fight like heck to get sober, even on the hardest and loneliest and saddest nights. She is now housed, she is working, she is sober, and she is fighting so hard for her babies who still every time she sees them say, Mommy, I just want to come home. And now we're just waiting. Because the system is a process, it is not individualized. And there is not a space to say like, okay, here you go. It is, okay, now we have to wait for this and this and this and this. And I told her this is the hardest spot because now you're ready and we have to wait. I worked with a mom a few years ago who fled a domestic violence situation, or didn't flee. She ended up in the hospital from a domestic violence situation. She left time and time and time again and kept going back. And we all know the statistics of domestic violence, the attachment and the trauma bonding that happens in those relationships. She ended up with a brain bleed in the hospital. Kiddo was removed from her care. And the system said, as long as you leave him and you get housed and you have an income, you can get baby back. And she did those things. But then the system said, well, now we're concerned about some things. We just want to make sure that you're stable enough. And she fell hard because she did not have any time to heal from the trauma that she went through. I share a lot about this system. And what I want to speak to really quickly is that the social workers that work in our foster care system are some of my favorite people on this planet. They are people that are caught in a really complicated, messy work environment where they are often overworked, they are often undertrained, and they are definitely underpaid. And many of the times they are speaking for a lot of other voices that don't have relationships with the people that they are advocating for. This mama ended up falling pretty hard, but she came back around and she fought really hard for kiddo. And a couple of years into the system, she came up to me one day and she told me, Holly, I finally get it. All the things I've been doing are because I didn't have support and love as a kiddo. I finally get it. I finally am ready to try to get healthy and to try to get help. And she did. But then the system said it was too late and she lost her daughter. We started the Family Connection program because we saw that there was a massive need for faith communities to say, we're going to be the people that help love some of the most vulnerable at-risk families in our society. We started the Family Connection program because we saw what the biggest need was not Christmas presents for the kiddos in our system, was not making sure that they had food and clothing, was not making sure that they had the safety and stability that the system is already fighting for, but to make sure that those kids have people that not only love them, but love their moms and dads as well. We started this program simply by opening up our small church building at the time and letting families come and have time together in our space. And then we brought in community volunteers of all faith bases, all different areas of diversity. And we trained them and said, because our families need supervision, would you consider supervising and would you consider loving them while you supervise? Our supervisors, they spend time with the same family week after week after week. They get a chance to love on them. They get a chance to just be there in some of the most beautiful and most horrific moments. They get to celebrate the first birthday party that shouldn't have to happen in a space that's not their home, but it does. They get to film it as kiddos take their first steps. They get to film as a kiddo comes and recites the speech that they so proudly wrote themselves. Our supervisors get to be there when mom walks in and proudly announces she got a job and kiddo follows behind and says, guess what? I got a D on my test, but it's not enough. And our supervisors get to be there during the hardest time when kiddo drives away with somebody else and they get to sit on the floor with that parent and hug them and tell them, we're going to get you through this. You can do this. We started this program because we realized that when people have trauma backgrounds, the number one factor that helps and supports them and helps them heal is a support system. And our faith spaces are supposed to be that, right? We're supposed to be that support system. We're supposed to be that safe place that says, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care what we've been through. You've been through. We're going to love you no matter what. We're going to be there for you no matter what. We're going to be there for the people you love no matter what. Our foster care system has a 42% reunification rate in our city. The families that we worked with at Family Connection, we are almost 70% now reunification. And the most beautiful thing about that is that the families that we have fallen in love with, it doesn't end when the case closes. Even those who don't reunify. I recently got to go bring a whole bunch of baby girl clothes to a mama who gave birth to a kiddo after she got the rest of her babies home. And she was fighting so hard to make sure she had all the right diapers and the formula and everything she could need to take care of this kiddo. And I asked her, what do you need? And she said, I've had back-to-back little boys that they all go by he, him pronouns. Like, I just really would like a couple pink dresses. So we brought boxes and boxes and boxes of pink. And I got to hold her and this sweet little baby and just so grateful for her mom's bravery, her mom's courage. I know Michelle put for the title of this message, the personal courage to love on families in the system, but I think the families in our system are some of the most courageous people I've ever met. And it's not courageous to love on them, it's a privilege. Holding their stories, holding the season of separation for them is one of the most sacred spaces that I've ever been in my entire life. Part of why I'm here today is to share with you that not only do we see a massive increase in families that are entering the foster care system, we also have a massive, massive need for more safe spaces for these families. And our program is growing, which is really cool because what was once a kind of crazy idea that I had that I then shared with my best friend, Christy Love, who's the pastor of the Connecting Grounds, who then told me, who also put her own personal experience and heartache into this program, who told me, Holly, as soon as we planted church, this program was born. And months after we planted Connecting Grounds, Family Connection was born. Sorry, emotional. This program is now in faith spaces in Orinoco, in Joplin, in Republic, in Columbia, in St. Louis. And we are seeing families across our state that are radically being changed because there are people that are able to say, I love you and I see you and I care. But we have a massive need for more help. And so we need a lot more volunteers. We also need a lot more spaces. And so I'm here today to just share with you I believe that places like this, I mean, I felt so invited coming into this little space. I had several people just like walk up to me and I was just like, hi, who are you? Let's make sure you know what you're doing. I sat in this service and felt like, I don't know. I have my own spiritual journey and my own spiritual spaces. And I just knew I was welcome here. And so I just want to challenge you, and I want to thank you for being a safe space. I want to thank you for being a welcoming space. I want to thank you for the work for social justice you are all doing every single day here. I also want to invite you into my own little corner of the world and my own little corner of social justice and say, if you are at all interested in learning about family connection and learning about how maybe you can get involved, I'm going to hang out after service and get a chance to talk with you. Our county is really good at having a whole lot of churches that work independently. And while there's been a lot of movement for unity, that unity across faith spaces for all issues of social justice is a huge, huge need. I'm ready to find other ways to unify and work together, and I'm excited because I know your spaces as well. So I believe that it's through relationships that we heal. And I would like to invite you into that healing with me. Thank you.